Hi, I'm Othais, and if you're a longtime fan of the show, then you probably recognize this as the German revolver model 79, the first Reichsrevolver. Let's go ahead and get it into the light box. Rugged, heavy, single action only with a confusing manual safety, the 79 is perhaps the most brutalist gun we've ever seen. It chambers its own unique 10.6mm black powder cartridge, 6 to a cylinder, singularly loading and ejecting with a separate stick. You're all familiar with my appeals for your engagement, my appeal for you to join us as a patron, so this time I'm just encouraging you all to enter the comments and yodel. Now, as I said, some of you probably recognize this handgun, and that's because we've covered the 79 before. Many years ago, Mae declared this the worst handgun that she has ever dealt with. However, that was one of our earliest videos, and it missed out on a lot of contextual history that makes this gun somewhat more sensible in hindsight, sort of. Well, it's been a while, we're older and hopefully wiser, better stacked with reference literature, thanks to our patrons actually, and Mae has had a lot more practice, so let's give this guy another solid crack, and we'll start things off with a little explanation of pre-unification Germany. This is a map of Prussia and Saxony. These are two of 4 kingdoms and a variety of grand duchies, principalities, free cities, and on that were more loosely associated and mostly under the influence of Austria until Prussia started kicking around Europe. I'm really simplifying this, but just for a bird's eye view, let's run through things. Prussian Minister-President Otto von Bismarck pursued a more hands-on political policy, spanking Denmark, taking Schleswig, and then picking a fight with Austria, the former center of the pan-German world. With Italy joining in, Prussian victory was secured. From here, Bismarck baited France into attacking the Proto-Germany, thus starting the Franco-Prussian War and giving him an external enemy with which to unify the German states. This newly united Germany promptly smacked the French armies into the ground, actually probably a bit too hard. It's beyond our scope today, but Bismarck had actually wanted to negotiate an early end to the war. However, a popular uprising in Paris brought about the Third French Republic, and so he was at somewhat of a loss to who he should even negotiate with for a ceasefire. From here we see France go into a state of total war, something of a new concept that would be magnified by all sides later on in World War I. All we care about for now, however, is that the German victory resulted in the January 1871 proclamation of Wilhelm I as German Emperor. The constitution would take a few months, but ultimately the unification was complete and Prussian hegemony over the new empire was secured. Okay, so what was the point of all that backstory? Well, when you have this mishmash of independent states blended into one massive martial power all of a sudden, I mean, maybe not all of a sudden, but rapidly, right? Right at the start of the most technologically accelerated period of firearms technology, it's probably time to start making some quick decisions about armament, particularly replacing a wild variety of guns with a singular rifle. We saw this accomplished with the single-shot centerfire metallic cartridge black powder large bore Mauser 1871, a gun we've happily covered before. Going by that model date, you can tell it was an early priority for unified Germany. Handguns, however, they lagged behind quite a bit, and in the meantime it was a mess of various designs, a great many single-shot percussion cap guns. Perhaps the most German option at this point, and maybe the most advanced, was the 1860s era Dreyse Revolver, a double-action only needle-fire design, which had been purchased privately by various officers in the German states. Another popular option was the Pinfire Lefaucheux, which had been trialed by pre-unification Bavaria. It proved too weak, however, and so their cavalry were outfitted with the Werder pistol. This was a single-shot, large-bore, black powder handgun of robust construction. This of course paired well with their Werder rifles, which we also touched on slightly in our Mauser 1871 episode. Now, of course, other kingdoms had their own trials ongoing for their own centerfire metallic cartridge handguns. Many of them, unlike Bavaria, were looking for a revolver. This was halted by Prussia, as with the rifle, they wanted a unified handgun. They wanted unified everything to keep interchangeability of ammunition, parts, and arms high. So a law was passed, and Prussia began looking for the first German handgun. But before they could get very far at all, Saxony did whatever the hell Saxony wanted. In 1873, the little kingdom that just couldn't would adopt a Smith & Wesson derived single-action break-open 11mm rimfire revolver. Shortly after production began, these would be converted to centerfire. 4,000 would be produced. Prussia was not happy. The matter was protested and they demanded an explanation. The Royal Saxon War Ministry kindly offered that they had not actually adopted a new revolver, as one of this type was already successfully in use in the field with their gendarmerie. They had just made several minor modifications and issued it to the cavalry and artillery. It's no big deal, Prussia. It's okay, we already had these. The only problem is the only revolver that we can identify of Saxon gendarmerie service at that time was a variation of the Sharps revolver, so that was just a bit of a giant fib. Accordingly, these mostly stayed in storage or in limited use until they could be displaced by the eventual Empire-approved revolver of later years. For anyone curious, the Saxon 73s were sold off in 1892 to C.G. Haenel & Soule, who reblued them and checkered the grips to make them nicer before selling them off commercially. Okay, so Prussia is going to be the one to make the call. We should probably understand something about their decision-making process. Since at least 1854, they had had a permanent defense examination commission located at the, Ruhleben-Spandau district of Berlin, which served as an advisory group to the War Ministry on the selection and improvement of weaponry. With the introduction of the Mauser 1871, this organization required some restructuring, as the advances in metallurgy, chemistry, and other sciences of war required, improvement and adaptation of the advisors. Unfortunately, this change came with some bumps, and likely was a partial reason for the long delay in adopting a Marshall handgun. Major restructuring was still going on in 1877 and only really finished up in May of 1879, just about the time of this gun's adoption. In addition to this tumult, Prussian archives suffered quite a bit of attrition during World War II, and many papers are either now destroyed or buried in some mothballed, captured pile, maybe in Russia. So our picture of the work up to the Reichsrevolver actually gets a little blurry. What we do know is that by about 1874, Prussia had several foreign designs in deep consideration. The Colt single-action army, which had actually arrived as early as 1872 in the form of some pre-production samples, the Adams revolver, a storied double-action now in centerfire, this was likely something between the Mark II and Mark III, the Belgian-made Pirlo, again a double-action which was, as far as I can tell, a Chamelot-Delvine action in the Swiss pattern, and the Smith & Wesson No. 3 Russian, a single-action design but sporting a top break-open action. Now that last one, the Smith & Wesson, made some sort of impression because it appears sometime in 1873 or 1874, Prussia settled on their new handgun cartridge. Conveniently similar to the .44 Russian, this is the 10.6mm Prussian caliber cartridge. It's totally not Smith & Wesson's design though, because the case is a little bit longer and the bullet weighs 2 more grams. This, of course, is charged with black powder. Having nudged a Smith & Wesson round, Prussia then ordered 40 revolvers chambered for this new ammunition, but they would not be the No. 3. No, the No. 3 was too fancy and weak, and also all the double actions were rejected unanimously. I have no idea why. This left only one option, the Colt. 40 Colt single-action armies and 7,000 rounds began field trials in December of 1874, and the results? Weirdly not great, although again, I can't be sure of the details as the paperwork is largely missing. We only really know what the other kingdoms thought about it. What I do know is this: Prussia requested the addition of a lanyard ring, and the trigger guard should be enlarged for gloved hands. Colt said, no problem, and then Prussia wandered off entirely. Now, just for comparison, Bavaria was also tinkering with pistols, and we have more records from them. In 1875, they had done comparative testing of several designs. Their 2 favorites were put up against their existing single-shot Werder pistol. So that's the established Werder versus the Colt Single Action Army and the Gasser 1870. Both revolvers were deemed too delicate and complicated to be worthy of displacing that single-shot cartridge pistol. Some of those same concerns may have also been on Prussia's mind, although not the bit about the Werder. Overwhelmingly, however, it appears that their chief concern was that all of these guns, well, they were foreign. Germans needed a German pistol after all, and so in 1877 the trials were halted and a special commission was assembled at Spandau, and they were charged with producing a new service revolver from scratch. Sadly, I don't know who headed this effort, or why they made the decisions that they ultimately did. I do know that the Mauser brothers attempted to provide their own solution. Sadly, this came too late. Submitted in 1878, the commission had apparently already nearly finished their work, which is kind of crazy fast if you ask me, but we'll see where they skipped some steps to get there. Honestly, I'd love to talk more about this particular piece someday, as the story is practically heartbreaking from the Mauser perspective. As for the actual adopted gun, I don't know of any prototypes or trials models. I just know that this gun right here shows us what actually happened, so we may as well take our clues directly from it. Let's get a closer look. Alright, this is a horse pistol. Holy crap, this is a big gun for big, meaty, gloved hands. And if you want an idea of the scale of the 1879, previously we talked about just how massive the Austrian 1870 Gasser was. The 1879 ekes it out just a bit at the edges. This is a big boy. And if you want a more dramatic showing, let's talk about Germany's smallest acquisition during the war. The little 32 ACP Bayards. Look at those guys. Compared to this, oh yeah, this is a big gun. Now, when we talk about this gun, I want to make sure that I point out the fact that these grips are unfortunately probably not original. They're very bright. They should be a much darker brown. It looks like a previous collector restored this gun in this regard. They are beautifully fit, but unfortunately I noticed that they are backwards. The escutcheons that hold the screw are the wrong side round. We should expect to see this screw head over here on the other side with the other screw heads. Instead, we see its butt. I tried flipping it, but unfortunately these are so perfectly relieved that it only really fits flush in this direction. Good job, 98 out of 100 somebody. Now, when we look at the gun itself, we're gonna see a sort of dull brown finish. That is as designed, that's not old rust. These were never deep blue guns as we think of modern bluing. These are much duller and almost like a softer finish that holds onto oil a little bit better, sort of a precursor to Parkerizing in that regard. We'll see this change for a little while in the next model. Now, the general layout, the fact that this has this big old curved grip, that mostly comes from the conservative members of the commission who wanted to keep the same ergonomics from the previous single-shot cavalry pistol. They took that curvature of the grip, but left off the rounded butt cap, and I think it's unfortunate that they got rid of the trigger rest on the trigger guard. Looks pretty cool. Also, if you look at the muzzle, you'll see another feature that will be carried forward. Get that right where you can see it, but there's a ring around our muzzle, like a little donut. Now, what that's doing is it's protecting the crown. It's preventing erosion right at the end of the muzzle as well. And it's also giving us a little bit of a pucker out when we're in the holster, hopefully keeping it moving in and out pretty slickly. Not sickly, slickerly. Anyway, you get the idea. It's a pretty cool little feature, but you don't normally see it on anything in the centerfire era. This is kind of weird to see almost. Now, in terms of operation, this is of course a single action only gun. That means our trigger does nothing until we cock the hammer. That indexes the cylinder, readies our trigger, then when we pull it, it goes bango. The internal mechanism for that, that's all from the Smith & Wesson No. 3. We'll see that better in our animation. Yeah, I can take this apart. We'll see it better in our animation, let's be honest. Now, the gun is gate loading like the Colt, because this is an amalgam gun. Smith & Wesson here, Colt gate loading. I suspect that the Germans might have preferred to go with the Chamelot-Delvine gate because they had seen it, and it's a better gate. That Chamelot-Delvine gate going backwards instead of out to the side and being less likely to get damaged. But that was under patent at the time in Germany. Colt's style of gate was no longer under protection, or didn't have it originally in Germany at all, this is what they were able to go with. So it snaps open with a spring, and then we can load our 6 cartridges. We can only do that, however, if the gun is in the half cock or kind of rebounded position. So we gotta get to that first kick, all right? That is our half cock. It means our trigger doesn't do anything. It means our cylinder rolls, but it also is the only position in which that hammer is taken up off of the firing pin of whatever's in the chamber. More on why that's critical in a bit. Now I can roll my cylinder, so that means I can load my rounds. There is only manual indexing. You have to position it accordingly yourself and put your cartridge in each of these. Now, when you're done firing the gun, you will open it and have to get those casings, the spent casings, out. And they may be formed up against the inside of the chambers, and so therefore you're going to need a little mechanical leverage, at which point you can simply turn to nothing. There's nothing here. This is not the ejector. We'll see this in a moment. Instead, the ejection system for this gun is a separate component, in this case a brass rod. Now this is an original brass rod. Unfortunately it came in after we filmed the shooting segment, so we had a 3D printed stand-in for that. If it looked nice and shiny and plastic, that's because it was shiny and plastic. This is old brass that has worn itself into a lovely, dull, not very luster. Now, it's solid, it's quite dense, and then you may notice that it has this hole here and be tempted to think of this as a cleaning apparatus. To my understanding though, no. The way these were attached to either your cartridge box or for some people their holsters, you would have a leather strap over one side, you'd have a leather strap through that hole, and that kept it from getting lost. That also means that it's a bit of a process to get it detached from your holster or your cartridge bag. You're probably not using this in the heat of the moment. You're also very likely to lose it. Now, if I flip the gun over, we can see how ejection would work in this case. We would manually index our cylinder, and then we would poke out our case, and then we would manually index our cylinder. Oop, I went too far. We'll have to catch that guy later, but we can get this one and poke out our case. This is not a high-speed operation. I think Germany expected you to shoot this gun exactly 6 times, and then to heck if you get a chance to reload. Now, while we're talking about accessories, I'll also mention the folding screwdriver. This was issued 1 for every 10 Reichsrevolvers, so you have to share with your friends. It's kind of cool that it folds up like that though. Now, both this and the ejector rod are hard to find, likely due to metal shortages in World War I. A lot of these probably ended up as shell casings or something else. Now, one of the most outstanding features on the Reichsrevolver is, of course, its big manual safety on the side of the gun there. Let me see if we can get, yeah, look at that guy, right? Now, you might think that the most obvious way to use this is a lot like a Colt 1911. You cock that hammer all the way back and just no, that's not gonna work, okay. Instead, the safety only works when the hammer is down. There, now we're safe. We're safe not from the trigger, we're safe from being able to cock the gun at all. And you may notice we can't even get to that sort of secondary position, that half cock, that rebounded position. So that means that where we're at now, we're up against a primer. I hope we've already fired it because it's gonna go off somehow or other. I will say, you can, if you previously put it in the half cocked position, you can then put on safety. This makes a little bit more sense to me, because in some regard, this is a certain amount of a hammer block potentially. So if you drop this gun, this may assist in not having it go off. Except, specific to the 79, I've noticed that you can do this. You can get a little bit back on her and pull that trigger. Let me see if I can do this on camera. Oh, and slip right on down anyway. So I can bypass the safety if I try. Now, mind you, I'm not slamming it very hard on that primer, but sure don't want to go riding around like that. And what I really don't like about this is I can't get back to that rebounded or half-cocked position. I do not know why these safeties exist. I wanted to, but unfortunately, again, everything from the Prussian Commission has been lost. We have no explanation for it other than repeatedly there are statements that the safety is absolutely essential. But there's no explanation of why it's essential. I have not been able to figure out a reasonable explanation for this thing. It is absolutely bizarre to me. Okay, so aside from the safety, what's going on with this gun? Well, we have a lever at the front here, and this is the only weak point on the Reichsrevolver as far as I understand it. It is very fine, very small, and it's part of our takedown system. These broke frequently, and it makes me nervous to even use one today because you got to pull it up off the gun and then push it down. And then at the 90-degree turn, where it's now projecting outside the framing, can very easily get smashed. That's when it releases this forward pin, and releasing that forward pin allows you to then, here, let me get this guy where you guys can see it, allows you to open this gate and then pull out this cylinder. I'm gonna go ahead and flip this back up a little bit because this makes me nervous. I really don't like that guy. All right, I wanna show you the cylinder because it has a very unique feature. Let's see if we can see that in the front camera, right there. Do you guys see the fact that there's two pieces in there? There's a cylinder within a cylinder. Well, I actually really like this about the Reichsrevolver because the ratchet, the teeth that the hand would engage to index the cylinder are actually a separate component that is fit inside the cylinder. So therefore, if these wear out, and they are a wear part, they could be removed at the armor level and replaced and retimed, and you don't have to waste the whole cylinder, which is actually a fair bit of machining. So I think of that as being, you know, a really good idea, honestly. I'm surprised I haven't seen more of that particular feature. Well, regardless of the unknown why, this was the gun approved for adoption by Wilhelm I himself in March of 1879, finally sealing Germany's first official handgun. All right, with that all in the bag, let's get a look at one of Bruno's lovely animations and hopefully see a bit more of how this works.
First, we'll open our loading gate and load 6 rounds individually, while manually indexing the cylinder. Being single action only, we'll have to cock the hammer back for each shot. A notch on its underside rests directly on the trigger, ready to be released. It's driven forward by a large flat spring attached to a spur at its rear. Attached directly to the hammer is the hand, which is pressed up against the cylinder's ratchet head by a flat spring also set in the hammer. The cylinder is aligned to the bore by the cylinder stop, which is sprung by a V-spring to rise. An extension at its rear is tripped by the trigger, which biases downwards, allowing rotation of the cylinder until the trigger is pressed back by the rotation of the hammer being cocked. The stop remains in place as the trigger is held back by the shooter on firing. The safety is just a hammer block, one that only prevents the gun from being cocked. By design, it was likely meant to keep the revolver in half-cock, though the examples we know of can slip out. Perhaps a manufacturing mistake. Just to be clear, the half-cock position is a deep-set notch in the hammer that prevents the trigger from being pulled. Finally, of course, there is the trigger, which is powered by a separate flat spring. Now, just for comparison, here's the Smith & Wesson No. 3 from our previous episode. Note the extreme similarities. Okay, let's go shoot.
You know, sometimes the more things change, the more they stay the same. Now, describing production for the Reichsrevolver is a little bit of a mess. That's because while Prussia led the development and adoption of this particular hand cannon, they did not do the distribution. Instead, each kingdom was responsible for its own military budget and supply. You can find which kingdom owned your Reichsrevolver by checking here on the Barrel Knox form. In this case, our example is from Prussia, represented by the iconic Prussian eagle. Bavarian guns were marked GF for Gewehrfabrik Amberg, which handled their acceptance. Saxony had a stylized monogram for Albert Rex, and Württemberg sported an antler taken from their coat of arms. Once the final pattern was ready, Spandau produced a set of drawings, instructions, gauges, and a handful of sample revolvers for distribution to the other kingdoms. Now, despite this experience, Spandau did not produce Prussia's own revolvers. Instead, Prussia would contract with two companies. Well, one company and one consortium. Consortium we've seen before, the Sul Consortium, a group of smaller arms manufacturers that have featured prominently in our German episodes. This time around, the consortium included J.P. Sauer and Son, C.G. Haenel, and V.C. Schilling. In addition to this grouping of smaller firms, they also signed with the prominently known Franz von Dreyse. Each company was to produce 30,000 Model 79 revolvers at a price of 32.5 marks. Unfortunately, Dreyse struggled to meet inspection goals and would fall behind on their deadlines. By 1882, Sol had finished their contract. This resulted in Dreyse, being reduced down to 19,000 revolvers, with the 11,000 surplus added to Sol. That same year, an additional order for 9,000 were also added onto their stack. Now, until that time, the Model 79 was intended primarily for cavalry and additionally for use with the field artillery. The new orders came in 1882, resulting in those new contracts because a decision to rearm the German Cuirassier was made. They were going to receive the revolver instead of the Mauser 71 carbine. It appears that they were having trouble with the shoulder arm when it came to their shiny breastplates. I find this particular fact interesting because our gun today seems to reinforce that very decision. Looking at this gun here, we have 1882 stamped right on the frame. Although this one's made by Dreyse, it still is in that year where they were considering giving these over to the Cuirassier, or rather they started giving them to the Cuirassier. And that works out pretty well because if you look at this butt, there's gonna be some markings that are a little too fine for the camera to make out here, so I'm gonna take a proper photo. You're going to see one canceled marking, as in struck through, and you're going to see an updated marking. The one that was struck through would have been the original unit designation for this gun. Now, in the German system, this includes not only the type of unit, but which numbered unit, and then it gets on into details from there, including maybe even the rack number of the gun or the count of the gun within that unit. These can be hard to interpret. I am not going to go into that science here. And as a collector, what you really care about first and foremost before getting to the surgery of it is what letters are present. In this case, the canceled letter is K. And in the context of this gun, that means the Cuirassier, as far as I understand it. If we look at the more updated markings, the ones that are not canceled, we're going to see the letters A and R. And I have come to understand that this means the mounted battery, as in the guys with horses who are dragging artillery around. That fits very well for how a Reichsrevolver should have been used. It's been in the saddle its entire military service. That's pretty cool. All right, so that's Prussia settled. Let's move on to Bavaria. The brothers Mauser at Oberndorf tendered the lowest price for their contract of 5,003 revolvers, 29.5 marks. By the way, those 3 revolvers, 2 were for ammo manufacturers and 1 was for the rifle factory at Amberg to keep as a pattern. In May of 1880, Bavaria decided to let out another contract, this time to cover rearming their artillery, since Mauser was moving slowly. They contracted for 3,300 revolvers from Dreyse. And this is where it gets weirder. Basically, the boys back at Spandau had played a little too loose with the drawings, and some critical problems were developing on Bavarian inspection. Particularly, the firing pins were punching all the way through the primers. While that was the most dramatic issue, it wasn't really the only one. A dozen parts had to be redimensioned and updated in terms of specification, engaging, and inspection tools were sent back out. This caused a huge delay, of course. But for Dreyse in particular, it seemed to cripple what limited momentum that they had gained, which will explain their dragging on two fronts. Even with allowances, Dreyse could not keep up, and so their contract with Bavaria would dwindle down to only 505 revolvers. The balance was moved to, you guessed it, the Sol Consortium, along with another order increase of 428 pieces, making for 3,223 in total. Württemberg's archives are sadly missing, but from Mauser's commercial records, it appears that they purchased 3,000 revolvers directly from Oberndorf, which should have covered their needs. Saxony would be the last state to adopt the 79, likely because they had the much more recent 73 still in hand, but in March of 1882, they would finally place their own orders. Purchasing from Sol, they had an initial contract for 2,000 pieces, followed by a second for 2,200 more. Despite being technically more numerous in origin than the Württemberg 79, Saxony's tend to be the rarest 79s found. That's because 2,500 were sold in 1893 in order to finance more purchases of, well, the gun we'll discuss in the next episode. Now, just being sold off early doesn't mean a lot, but it's believed that they were sent by C.G. Haenel to China along with some Mauser 1871s that they were selling. That's not good because very few collectibles have come back from that region. The story doesn't necessarily have much in the way of direct evidence, but it would really explain the current shortage on Saxony 79s. Okay, we've covered a lot of little markings across tens of thousands of revolvers, but here's one more. These little digits represent the nominal bore size of the barrel affixed to this particular Reichsrevolver. A lovely bit of German inspection for you. And speaking of bullets, sometime between 1881 and 1884, the cartridge was changed. That's right, the ammo I showed you initially was the Revolver Patron Alter Art, or old model. This is the Revolver Patron NA, newer art. There's no ballistic change that I know of, but the case head has been reinforced, just like Germany did with the Mauser 71 ammunition. Okay, so we have all these Model 79 revolvers. The German cavalry, cuirassier, and many artillery are properly equipped. We have improved ammunition. It's all good, right? You guys know this show too well. No, the Model 79 is a bit of a disaster. It took too long to get around to. Initial production was plagued with issues, and by the time it was finally ready, everyone had sort of realized that this is ridiculously big and ridiculously simple, kind of hard to manufacture, and that takedown lever on the side here, it keeps breaking off, even after we introduced a slightly reinforced one. It's getting annoying to replace them already. I'm gonna be honest with you, the Model 79 would be, as a gun, replaced in just 4 short years, but that doesn't mean the existing ones left service right away. Instead, as you well know, because it's on our show, it would still be around for quite a long time, long enough that we get to make a second episode, one that covers its little brother, some commercial variations, and of course, how it was able to make an appearance in the Great War. If that's unsatisfying, I apologize, so let me just show you this. It's a drawing of Dreyse's attempt to unload about 800 rejected M79 revolvers. This is their lightened officer's model, which still wasn't very light and proved unpopular, but sometimes you can still spot one in the wild. Alright, with the 79 covered, let's get Mae in here for her opinion on shooting this beast. Alright gang, once more we've made room for Mae, and we also have just enough room for this monstrous revolver.
Ooh, fancy.
Right. We've done the 79 before, so this is a recap for you. You have had experience with this particular, well, not even this one, you've had experience with another one.
Yeah, and then another one, and now this one.
Right, so you've handled 3 79 Reichsrevolvers.
Although y'all only got to see me handle the first one and this one, so there is a mystery one.
Yeah, but you didn't shoot the other one, you just handled it, right?
Right.
Okay. But we're going to have to pretend first impressions as if you haven't handled a Reichsrevolver before.
What is this?
What stands out to you ergonomically when you pick up this gun?
Well, first and foremost, massive. Just huge. This is on gasser level proportions, I want to point out, just on how big this guy is. Incredibly long. This grip poses a huge amount of confusion for me because honestly, it's got this interesting curve to it. So, okay, obviously I'm going somewhere on the wood for my grip. I can tell there. But where am I supposed to grip on this thing?
It looks graceful.
Yeah, it does. It's elegant.
This is the thing to me. Like, you look at it, and it's very graceful looking, you know? It's very sleek.
Yeah.
It's a continuous curve. There's maybe a slight little nudge there.
Maybe. There's maybe a little taper right there. Maybe.
But so smooth, you know what I mean? And then you put your hand on it.
Yeah, I just can't tell where I'm supposed to grip this thing because there's no indicators. There's no notches in the wood or the metal. There's no real, there's no massive taper or widening at the base that I can tell, I'm supposed to obviously grip down to.
There's no healing, no finger grooves, there's no spur, there's nothing to it to give you a signpost for where to be.
Right, so I guess it's just wherever comfort ends up, and we'll get more into probably how that can be slightly annoying to grip this guy later on the shooting, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah, otherwise, features, it's got this bizarre looking safety on the side, which, don't get me wrong, guns with safeties, it makes sense, okay, sure. But a revolver, a single action revolver with this massive lever safety on the side doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah.
And especially for the fact that you can't pull the hammer back and put the safety on. The hammer's got to be forward.
Right.
What?
I suspect that this is supposed to be acting as a hammer block. Mm-hmm. That's my intuition. I cannot find it in the paperwork, but I think it's supposed to be a fear of a hammer smack. And we've seen, people make fun of SIG, but hammer block is still a thing. People care about being able to drop a gun. Sure. So I imagine that must have been what the original intention was. My only problem with that is we've already seen automatic methods for doing this on, say, again, we mentioned the gasser.
Yeah.
That had an automatic spring for it that was available in 1870, and this is from 1879. So it's just...
Right, so this came after the gasser.
Long after. They had clearly seen the gasser already.
All right, cool. So they decided to go with this instead.
I don't know. It is a very odd choice, and it stays through both guns, so they must have found it to be very important, which is why I think hammer block to a degree. But regardless, what else have we got going on here? Because it's a single loader. Yeah.
So I remember when you first handed me this gun years and years ago, I saw this little knob out here on the front and I went, oh, clearly that's got to be an ejector rod. It's just something that I'm going to have to twist out and pull out and be able to use. That makes sense,
right? This is something that you're used to from the Nagant revolvers.
Right. Yeah, totally something I was expecting. And then you were like, no, we're going to use a stick. But when we first filmed, and I went, okay, no, what? So what? Okay, so that's part of the takedown then instead. Okay, sure. So a stick, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, at that time, I only knew of the stick.
Yeah.
It turns out when you have reference material in German and everything's nice, and we have supporters, I can find things like this, an actual brass ejector rod for a Reichsrevolver.
Where did you get that from?
I believe we had this one flown in from Lithuania just in time. As a matter of fact, so just in time that it was not here the day we filmed outdoors, and the very next day when we filmed indoors, it managed to show up. So, nick of time.
Right, so we at least got to have it for the episode, so that's pretty cool.
Right. So, yeah, you would have this attached to... the way these were issued is you had a loose cartridge belt. So you had a cartridge belt that had loose rounds in it. The cartridge belt was tight. It fit to your body.
Right.
And then where the flap is for that cartridge box, I shouldn't say belt, I should say box. Where the flap is at the hinge, this would be up behind the hinge. And then there'd be a piece of leather over one side, a piece of leather through the other side.
Right, because there's a hole right there.
So getting this off would mean turning and fiddling with it and then pulling it out, unthreading it from the leather.
So there's really no rapidity with this.
Yeah, you're not boom, 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 and then you turn around.
Whip, bap, 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 bap.
Yeah, there's no quick. Now, there's also holsters that would have a spot for it vertically on the holster. Same thing, though, a piece of leather through it. So you have to unbuckle it and pull it off the holster and then use it to eject your rod. So this is, I get it. They're coming from single shot percussion cap primarily. And maybe they've experienced the Dreyse needle fire revolver.
Yeah.
Now, those were notorious for being carried with a second cylinder so that they could just hot swap cylinders. These are, as far as I know, that they're doing. There's no extra
There's
cylinders.
no hot
I don't even know.
swap. Okay.
I haven't even heard of commercial ones with extra cylinders, but that might have happened in the commercial market. But yeah.
But yeah, on top of that, it's a gate loader, and then it isn't like previous guns with their systems where I can pull the trigger to manually rotate the cylinder to rapidly load in my rounds. No, I've got to index the cylinder myself, and then hopefully nail it on the first go, because there's no going back. There's only going forward.
Right. There's no signposts there.
No.
And then really, like, it's interesting because you're either shooting it or not, because it doesn't have a cylinder stop that works when it's in the half cock.
Nope.
So you just have to leave it on the last primer that you set off if you didn't want it to
Otherwise,
rotate to
it
the
can
next
just
position.
go.
Yeah.
But very smooth sounding.
Now,
It's
all
not
this would be
nice.
perfectly understandable if we were dealing with, I mean, you think about the Colt Single Action Army, that's really 1870s,
Yeah.
It's not an anachronism that this is from the 1870s in a single action only in military use.
Sure.
The problem is it's from 1879. By then, think of all the guns we've seen. We've seen, the Chamelot Delvines over in France are standing out, solidly.
True. Those are good.
Yeah, and then the Gasser had been around the Gasser was very advanced in some ways, but it had been around, like we said.
Yep. It had been around for almost a decade.
In the late 70s, you tend to see a lot of double action starting to show up in different, sort of European armies. So you could almost forgive the single action, but then no ejector rod, the manual safety.
Yeah, no.
There's a lot of other feature creep. And then on top of that, it is still shaped like a horse pistol from the previous, era.
Right, that grip in and of itself is incredibly dated.
Yeah.
I don't understand the real need for it.
This is absolutely the minimum updating that you could do, in my mind. This is the minimum update you could do to turn a cavalry pistol of that era into a repeating revolver. Like, it's like they almost were like, do we have to change it? It's like, yeah, they said make a revolver. I put a cylinder on it, and then that's what we ended up with, And then they were like, I don't trust it, put a safety on there. Like, it feels like the committee was scared of, it feels like the committee didn't actually want to adopt a revolver.
It is pretty sturdy, and it did its job for every single round. We didn't have any failures with it.
Oh, they're bomb-proof.
Very resilient.
They're bomb-proof other than that takedown lever.
Yeah.
Which broke all the time, apparently. All right, so shooting. We're kind of, we've gotten deep, but let's talk about actually pulling the trigger. What's it like to really get behind that gun?
So obviously, we've got single action. Okay, sure, that would be fine in and of itself. But why is the hammer on this so dang heavy? It doesn't quite make sense that they would make it as ridiculously heavy as it is.
Right. When we did our first episode, we had a sample size of 1.
Right.
And it was a very heavy hammer.
And I remember it. I remember thinking, oh God, this is going to be impossible. My hand's going to be shaking on camera. I'm going to look like I'm fumbling with it. And I did. It looked awkward and awful.
Yeah, and your hand strength wasn't as good back then.
Right.
To be perfectly honest, Mae's trained up her hand strength. And so at that time...
I was pretty confident when he said we were going to do this episode again, that I was going to be able to do just fine. And then we got one in again.
Yeah, so in between them, we'd also encountered another Reichsrevolver that had a very, not super light, but a much lighter hammer spring.
Very pleasantly surprised about that one. I was like, this one's fairly doable. What's going on here? This doesn't seem right.
So then we theorized that maybe the one we had been just unusually heavy.
Right.
So then we got this one in.
And no, this one's actually probably pretty on par with the other one. Yeah, it's fairly up there in terms of that hammer spring strength. Like it's high.
Yeah. And so I noticed that you were not always cocking it one-handed.
No, definitely was not. I mean, I was able to on the first pull because I was able to, with that first pull up, my grip was exactly where I wanted it to be in the proper position to get a good solid pull on that hammer back. So I had the best strength and the best grip available to me. And when it goes boom, unless you are death gripping this guy, your grip is shifting so easily, just slipping on this grip.
There's almost no way to keep a solid grip. Like, this gun is designed to be white knuckled all the way through.
Absolutely.
And I know people had, by the way, hand size roughly the same back then.
I mean, if I had a glove, maybe.
Hand strength of adult males back then would have been much higher. I guarantee you. Like, you're not trying to pretend that you're as strong in the hand as they were.
No.
they probably could cock it just fine, and they could probably white knuckle it better to keep the grip more stable. And we did do, I think, a high speed of you white knuckle, like really bearing down.
Yeah, we did a high speed of me just shooting it normal, and then we did a high speed of me white knuckling it, and then even you got to do a high speed this time around.
I think not with that one though. I think that was with
no, you did with this one.
Okay, regardless, what you tend to see is that when Mae holds the gun in such a manner that she can manipulate the hammer, she ends up choked up way too high.
Right.
So if she can bear on the hammer, now she's choked up in this way that's got her kind of cocked awkwardly on the gun. Mm-hmm. And then whenever it actually fired, what happened?
So it was repeatedly something that continued to happen, and you definitely see it happen almost every single time, was that my knuckle on my thumb was getting bashed by the knob on the rear end of the safety.
Right.
Like it was every single time practically that it went off. And again, granted, when I did white knuckle it, I was able to retain it and it wasn't shifting so bad, but...
How was your accuracy when you were white knuckling it?
Not super great, which is why I did not white knuckle it the whole shoot. I only did it for the high speed, just as an example, so that your viewers could see.
So cranking down on your handgun with your hand, like holding it as tight as you can, not good for your accuracy, but on this particular one, holding it loose, and it's almost like the safety acts as sort of a slide stop for your thumb, like
Kinda,
boom.
yeah. It definitely stopped. I mean, eventually it took the skin off the top of my knuckle, but it did stop it every time.
Poor Mae her thumb was torn up. And I think this, again, it goes back to what we were saying in the ergonomics. There's just nothing to interrupt. Like, there's no control in the grip. It gives you it's just a banana.
Yeah.
It's just smooth.
Actually, a banana's pretty accurate for that.
Imagine trying to shoot 44 Russian out of a banana. Like, it just slides around in your hand. Actually, no, because a banana is not as slick.
No, that's true. Banana has a peel texture.
I think a banana would be easier.
Probably.
Yeah.
Can I shoot a banana?
So,
that's a Tell Flavor Must video right there.
The single action is very difficult to use.
Yep.
The grip slides all over.
The sights are, while they look very tall, are actually quite shallow.
I found that amazing. I thought the one good thing would be the sights.
No, they are not redeeming into themselves. Like the front sight looks pretty tall, and you're like, oh, cool, tall, nice V blade.
Well, they're
there.
massive
it's like
sights, and the notch is just itty
super
bitty.
tiny, and you're just like, finding the sight. Oh, there we go, found the sight. It takes you a minute.
Yeah, and because they're cutting this big block, you're struggling to find that front sight.
You're basically filling in a rectangle.
Well, you're going back and forth trying to find the front sight, and then but there it is. Oh crap!
Yeah.
So
not redeemable.
No.
Okay, cool. Poor Reichsrevolver. The trigger might be the only redeemable thing, possibly. Just because once you get that hammer pulled back, it's actually kind of smooth. It's nice.
Yeah, I actually did find it to be it's a smooth single stage trigger. Works
it's not
great.
bad. And then the recoil on this one was not fantastic.
I didn't think the recoil was too bad. I just think the ergonomics ruin it.
Well, I guess maybe it's not that fantastic because I'm thinking of it in terms of how I shot it previously. Because if I remember correctly, our ammo that we previously the first time around years ago was much lighter loaded than the ammo we shot today, which was much more accurate to what the load was supposed to be.
Right, and it kicks a bit, but it's a heavy gun. I don't know.
That might be why I was anticipating it was more than I was expecting.
But it does not. The problem is a bad grip does not help you in any way, shape, or form.
Really does not.
All right, so I guess the final consideration is how confident would you be if you were a World War I, 1914 soldier, and you were given one of these to use to defend yourself?
Yes, so, here's the thing. I don't even think in 1879 I would want to have this because I know by even 1879 I've got better options.
I would take it over a percussion cap pistol.
I mean, yeah, but like you said, the gas is already out. The Chamela Delvine that we've shot is already out.
You better make your shots count, is all I'm saying.
This is not super confidence inspiring, so unfortunately I'm going to have to give this one a no.
Is there any handgun that you would put below this one? Just off the top of your head, I'm not challenging you to remember every handgun we've done, but let's think of some of the little 32 pocket guns that aren't great. The little Bayard. Let's talk about that little. Remember the little Bayard 32 that hold 5 rounds or something?
Good. I mean, I'm gonna be able to conceal that.
Yeah, a little tiny thing of like a little tiny baby 32 with 5-6 rounds in it, or this.
But that's semi-auto.
Yeah. And you can probably, and you can
I can get off a lot more rounds of 32 than I can off of this guy.
If you have no spare mags for the 32, oh well, you're not reloading this in a fight.
No. So, yeah, I'm going to take the one that I possibly might be able to reload way faster and shoot off way faster.
I could drop a mag and reload the little mag with loose rounds and put it back in the gun and rack
Faster than this guy.
than that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
I
just don't see it. I don't see a world in which I'm taking this one into battle unless it's a really sad, bad world.
So, the Reichsrevolver's had its chance to come back around for you to finally learn how much you love it.
Oh, God. Actually, you know what? It is an interesting gun. I did enjoy having a second round with this guy. I'm happy I got to shoot it again. And I'm happy we get to play with it some more.
I actually know of another gun that I would like to try. However, no one has come forward to loan it, and I'm scared to say it because I only know of a few for sale.
Oh, God.
But there is a gun I would like to try that is a cousin to this in a way.
Maybe if you say it 3 times like Beetlejuice, it'll appear.
No. If you own a gun like this that's not this, you probably know what I'm talking about. Let me know. And not the other Reichsrevolver. That's next episode.
Spoilers.
But it would take some custom ammo. It would take a fair bit of money to get it in. Mm-hmm. But it is ever so slightly ergonomically improved. And I really would like to try that gun to really understand if it's the ergonomics or the size or the cartridge, because it's similar in a lot of ways.
Is the ammo similar to this one? Because this one's kind of close to
similar
44
enough.
Russian.
It would be similar enough.
Okay.
Like I suspect, because the only difference is it has a rake instead of a curve. And it's still not a great grip. But I bet you it would be demonstrably better, but I'd have to try it out to know for sure.
I think I know what you're talking about. I'd be curious to try it.
I'll see. If nobody comes forward, I might try to invest some cash in it. So support us on Patreon and subscribe to our and all the rest.
If you can, we appreciate it. We'll keep trying and keep shooting.
But next time, obviously, we're going to talk about the other Reichsrevolver. Things change rapidly these days, so stay tuned for any updates after the credits.
Please do.
Yeah, have a good one, everybody.
Night, guys.
All right, guys, like pulling off a Band-Aid, I need to talk about something right at the top of these updates, which is that the U.S. politics are tricky at the moment. A lot of you have varied views, and I have my own, and I'm really not going to subject you to them. C&Rsenal is trying to make sure that it positions itself as an objective historical show, and it also needs to do one thing and do it well. And it's not politics. I know there's been some pressure for us to get into politics. I think I'm not a politician. So you're not going to get it here at the show. That being said, I have made a promise that if there's immediately pending legislation that will affect our ability to produce the show, I will tell you. I'm working on how to do that, but yes, I will. So if somebody came out with a law against Mausers, I would probably tell you, hey, there's a law coming up against Mausers. There will be no more Mausers on the show. I know that seems a little silly, but there are other things that you don't think of that might affect Curio and Relic that do affect Curio and Relic. So if it happens, I will let you know. But otherwise, we're keeping our mouths shut. It's just not for C&Rsenal. I'm sorry. There's lots of guys that I know and love who can talk to you about politics, and you should find them and subscribe to them, and they work very hard on it. It's just we don't work that hard on it. Now, in terms of show production, I need to talk about the fact that we are going to see some differences in Primer because we are going to transition away from being reliant on period media, so films and photographs and things like that. As we leave World War I, anything after 1923-24 is going to be dubious as to what its copyright is, and that gets risky for us. If we go back before World War I, there's not a lot of photographs, so that is also difficult for us. So we're just going to have to rely on less of that traditional media, or well, the historical media, and we're going to have to rely more on our own in-house product. So you're going to see a few little changes. I'm sorry, but it's the way it's going to be. But we get to see newer and cooler guns. Now, while we're talking about that, I know a lot of you are going to want to loan us stuff. The way to do this is to contact me through our contact form at c&rsenal.com, because that is going to go into a system that I can then search. If you DM me, PM me, Facebook Messenger, whatever that stuff is, you have a 99.99% chance of it being lost forever because I can't search it, I can't pin it, I can't file it, I can't do anything with it to remind myself what to do with it 6 months down the road when I'm finally ready for the information. But if you would like to loan us stuff, do so. Please don't tell me you have 1,000 guns and not really tell me what they are or what kind of collection they are, because I you could have 1,000 M1 carbines, and then I could go 6 hours to meet you, and then I end up doing one episode on M1 carbines. You know, like, you got to tell me what you got to a degree. It's very helpful if you have things that are in sort of developmental sequence. So if you have guns that are sort of in a lineage, that helps a lot. But otherwise, we're happy to borrow whatever. Just let us know. And then finally, if all this seems like not enough detail, don't forget, you can subscribe over at like Patreon or Subscribestar. There's a behind the scenes podcast for every subscriber that lets you know more about what we're actually doing. It lets you keep up with the show better. And then 2, if you're at the $5 level, don't forget that there's also a PDF every month that includes a scanned historical document that has a gunner outdoors focus. We had a lot of fun with one recently that was auto camping. So it's like Model Ts with tents on them. Not really much in the way of firearms, but I'm going to tell you, everybody seemed to really enjoy and discuss that. And a lot of people will remember their Boy Scout years. So if you want to see those things, come on by and help us out with the show. All right, have a good one.